Thank you very much. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 24139 in the name of John Finney on investing in Scotland's railways. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I invite those members who wish to speak in this debate, please to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on John Finney to open the debate.
Many thanks indeed, Presiding Officer. Greens believe that investment, expansion, upgrading and decarbonising the rail network could play an important role in Scotland's economic recovery from COVID-19. We know it would create jobs and it would reduce emissions from other forms of transport. So I welcome the growing debate around the future investment for rail. Thank members who signed my motion and thank those who will contribute in the debate tonight. A focus of this will be the Rail for All report, which I commissioned, which was welcomed by many from rail professionals, engineering professionals and trade unions. It was written by David Prescott and David Spavin, acknowledged industry experts. It's a 20-year, fully costed £22 billion plan of investment for Scotland's railways to build a modern zero-carbon network that's affordable and, importantly, accessible to all. It makes rail the natural choice for commuters, businesses and leisure travellers. And we believe that such an investment should be a central component of the green recovery from COVID. It's based on the following principles, Presiding Officer, that everything proposed is from existing technologies. The rail network should be zero carbon. Full electrification is the way to do that. The oft-suggested alternative of hydrogen from renewable energy is a limited resource and best used in sectors where there's no alternative, such as heavy industry. Journey times need to be significantly reduced, and all communities over 5,000 should be connected to the rail network. And where that's not possible or at a realistic cost, an integrated coach route and bus network should be part of that integrated transport network. And to that end, the Scottish Government should activate the Transport Act provisions, allowing local authorities to run their own bus services. The pandemic has shown that rail freight is resilient, and a continued shift from road to rail will substantially reduce carbon emissions and ease congestion on road. The Scottish Government's own Infrastructure Commission said that the priority should be the maintenance of the existing road network, and we know that there's a £1.8 and a £1.2 billion backlog on local authority and trunk road maintenance, so that should be the focus rather than expansion. The motion also mentions the Highland Main Line, and there's no doubt that upgrading and electrifying the Highland Main Line is of strategic importance. There's an immediate comparator because for many miles of the journey, it runs alongside the A9. £3 billion expenditure there, 4 lanes for motor vehicles, 1 track for the train. So we've seen the value in recent times redirect traffic from following the activities of the Aberdeen Central Belt lines. So what the motion calls for is rapid decarbonisation of Scotland's rail network in line with the climate targets. And that will support our long-term prosperity and be of benefit for future generations. Now, it's not to say that there haven't been improvements, Presiding Officer. We know there's been improvements on the Anglo-Scottish services and in and around Glasgow and Edinburgh, but the network north of the Central Belt has been largely neglected, and passengers are dependent on an ageing network that performs poorly. And the historical comparators are well known by many that you could have travelled similar quicker in Victorian times. So to catalyse the expansion and improvement of our rail network, we urgently need to reform the institutions and decision-making processes. And everyone must be aligned behind this goal. It must be coordinated, it must be streamlined. As things stand at the moment, all transport infrastructure investment projects have to go through the Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance, the STAG process. And we know that that's extremely detailed, extremely complex, time-consuming and costly. And sadly, as with many issues, its application by Transport Scotland is pedantic. Critical importance in achieving the Scottish Government's 2035 rail decarbonisation target is the need to treat core rail electrification as a single project with a single appraisal delivered by a number of discrete contracts, much as the way that the Scottish Government has with their fuelling project, ironically on the A9 and the A96. And important too is that we reintegrate ScotRail and Network Rail into one publicly owned company with oversight by Scottish ministers. There's no place for private profit to offshore companies from vital public services. So the incoming Scottish Government must, at the earliest possible opportunity in the next parliamentary term, must make clear that they prioritise the delivery of a modern zero-carbon rail network that is accessible to all, and that key institutions such as Transport Scotland are fully aligned with that role. And to do that, they need to establish a task force. They need to establish a task force. And examples of the early successes that could be delivered are things like the provision of additional stations, opening existing freight lines for passenger trains. It's a move that the UK government are doing, and initiating a rolling programme of electrification. And I recognise the work that has taken place. Small-scale electrification, too, to eliminate pockets of diesel working generally in areas where there already is electrification. And, of course, the possible use of electric battery bi-mode trains. And there are other things that can be done about points for electric vehicles at stations, and better access for biking and walking. Some of the focus on the report was on the much publicised fourth tunnel. And there are real benefits to be had from that, because it will free up capacity at Haymarket, and of course it would allow greater movement to the west as well as the north. There's so much that could be said, and in the very limited time that I have, Presiding Officer, I just want to say that the most cost-effective and cheapest ways of expanding the network is to introduce services on existing freight lines. We can see that, and I think my colleague Mark Ruskin will talk about that. Freight is most efficient and suitable. Rail is the most efficient, sustainable means of shift freight, and that's particularly the case over long journeys. It has, unfortunately, a modest share of the market, despite road haulage being having issues with climate, air quality, and congestion and safety. What I want to close by saying is that one of the authors of the report, David Spavin, said, in commending the report, he said, based on our long experience in the industry and taking account of international best practice, we put together a programme focused not just on rail's crucial contribution to decarbonisation, but also on the wide range of other environmental, social and economic benefits. I commend that report, and I look forward to other contributions. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. And I call on Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I start by drawing members' attention to my register of interests in relation to my being Honorary President of the Scottish Association for Public Transport and the Honorary Vice President of Rail Future UK. And may I also start by thanking John Finney for the opportunity to discuss railways, and in particular how they may be part of the post-COVID world. John Finney mentioned Mr. Spavin. I have his wonderful published atlas of Scotland's railways, historical view of the railways of Scotland, which my wife gave me as a Christmas present some years ago. An excellent book. I commend it to you all. The railway is, without question, the most comfortable way to travel. And if I look at a comparison between my driving from home to Parliament and alternatively making the journey using a train for all but my 15 miles to the station, it is actually half the cost to use the train. But more to the point, is very substantially more environmentally friendly. And under government plans will become even more so. The steam trains that I travelled in the 1950s, I particularly remember a trip from Benderloch to Oban in 1956 to attend hospital after sunstroke, were fascinating. They were noisy, aromatic, with all the mechanical gubbins reciprocating in full view, engaging to the eye, but environmentally friendly. They most certainly were not. Coal burning and emitting vast amounts of smoke and particulates. Today's trains are faster, smoother, quieter, and increasingly powered by renewable energy. And the refreshments from the onboard trolley on a longer journey are tastier and use more locally sourced ingredients. The overnight sleeper is the only way to travel south if travel to the south is something you must do. I'm old enough to remember when the Highland Main Line was dualled, At least I'm fairly certain it used to be dualled all the way down to the Central Belt. We'll live with many of the short-sighted decisions made in the 1960s. We all remember the Beeching report, but actually that's a very unfair description of what happened. Beeching was paid a considerable amount to implement a policy decision emanating at the desk of the then UK Transport Minister, Ernest Marples. He was the managing director of Marples Ridgeway, a road construction firm with substantial interests in building motorways. He may tell us all we need to know about his motivations and actions to remember that he ended up fleeing from the House of Lords to Monaco to escape prosecution for tax fraud. We should perhaps remember this inglorious period in our railway history as the Marples catastrophe. But we now have the opportunity to improve the railways we have and extend the reach of our railways. In my part of the country, it is time to look at taking the railway back to Ellon, and then to the biggest non-railway towns, which are Peterhead, population 19,000, and Fraserburgh, population 15,000, which are in my constituency. Economic sense, environmental sense, energy sense. My favourite mode of transport, the railway. I've happy memories of travelling on bits of the network that don't exist anymore. Brought up in Cooper, I used to choose to go the long way round to Dundee, to the Slimming Baths, via Tentsmuir, Tayport, Newport and Wormit. No longer there, perhaps in future it might be. Thank you once again, Mr Finney, and thank you for the government for your support of our railways. Thank you very much for calling me to speak this evening, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I now call Graham Simpson to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also thank John Finney for bringing this debate to the Chamber? I hope he's still watching, because I would say to him that he's entitled to make contributions remotely, but I think quite a bit of the important stuff he said was lost. And that's a shame, because this is a really important debate, and I was really happy when I saw that we would be debating Scotland's railways. Less happy when I realised it would involve looking at the Green Party's website to find that the report mentioned in the motion. But however, the proposals in Rail for All, they make for interesting reading and show that there's not a great deal of difference between parties when it comes to rail. We all agree that we need to decarbonise the network. We all agree there needs to be a push towards electrification. The Greens don't seem overly keen on hydrogen, but I have to say I think it could have a place. They want to connect more communities by rail. So do we, which is why both north and south of the border were saying that we should look at reopening old routes. And they want to move freight from road to rail, which is sensible where possible. The report suggests a number of projects. One is for 2 9-mile tunnels under the Firth of Forth from Abbey Hill, which is just along the road from this Parliament. Now, I'm not really in any position to be criticising ambitious tunnelling plans, but this doesn't look likely to happen anytime soon to me. There's also a proposal for a new overground station at Argyle Street in Glasgow, and this would be above the car park behind the St Enoch Centre. And I'm not sure how feasible that would be. There's a host of other proposed projects too. It's actually a very thorough report. So I do commend Mr Finney and the Greens for commissioning. I do think our railways can be an important part of a green recovery from COVID. They can help to decarbonise our transport system. A modern, efficient public transport system with clean trains or buses that run on time and are low emission can and should help to encourage people away from cars. Yes?
Neil Findlay.
No, disagreed with a thing he said so far. But given the track record of privatisation, how can we possibly have any faith that that model would continue and provide the type of railway service that he says he wants?
Graham Simpson.
Well, see, I'm not as obsessed by ownership as Neil Findlay is. I think what matters is the service that's delivered to the public. That's what counts. Now, the motion mentions the Highland Main Line, and it says, and if I can quote from the motion, from the report actually, the Highland Main Line is 2/3 single track, putting severe restrictions on capacity and speed. Electrification could bring substantial journey time savings. And I agree with that. It seems to me absurd that you've got such a line, running from alongside the A9 broadly, that is 2/3 single track. So we do need to look at a line like that. I've got a similar issue in my patch, the line from East Kilbride to Glasgow, which is not fully dualled. That has presented issues, but I'm delighted to say that is going to be electrified and twin-tracked. And I've got to praise the Cabinet Secretary for helping to deliver that, and work is starting on that as we speak. So I realise I'm out of time, but I'll just end by thanking John Finney once again. It is a useful debate, a useful motion, a useful report actually, although I wouldn't agree with everything in it, but it helps to spark the debate, and that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. I call Colin Smith to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I refer members to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest, which states I'm the volunteer chair of the campaign for the reopening of Eastriggs Railway Station. I can also thank John Finney for tabling his motion and providing the opportunity to debate the importance of investing in our railways. I know this won't be Mr Finney's last contribution in the Chamber, but I don't know if it may be his last members' debate that he leads. So in case it is, I want to place on record my appreciation for the many thoughtful contributions we've heard from John Finney that I've had the privilege of listening to in my short time in this Parliament. I think John Finney brings a knowledge and wisdom to debates, and although this it won't do his legacy any good, I think we share many of the same principles, particularly when it comes to our belief in public ownership of our railways. I particularly want to thank Mr Finney for his support on the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. There are many occasions where I suspect both of us felt we may be ploughing a lone furrow when trying to amend government legislation. I don't know exactly how many 9-2 votes that were on the committee, but I know there were a lot, and I know that every one of them, of the two, were myself and Mr Finney, but I think we were both in good company. It's appropriate that Mr Finney should bring the issue of investment in our railways to the Chamber, because I know it's a subject that he is passionate about. In particular, Mr Finney's motion highlights the need to upgrade and electrify the Highland Main Line. Now, I know my colleague Rhoda Grant has been working tirelessly with friends of the Far North Line, campaigning for more frequent services and improvements to a line that really has lacked investment for far too long. Over the weekend, we saw the Highland Main Line once again closed to flooding, cutting off direct rail links between Edinburgh and Glasgow, highlighting yet again the lack of resilience and the need for a plan for badly needed improvements to the line, including a clear timetable for electrification. And sadly, that's the case for many other neglected parts of Scotland when it comes to rail investment, including my own South Scotland region. If the government are serious about delivering inclusive economic growth and meeting our climate change targets, we need to see an equitable share of infrastructure investment across Scotland. And I want to highlight just some examples. The current line to the southwest from Glasgow, which runs between Glasgow and Kilmarnock before branching off in two directions to Stranraer in the west and Carlisle in the east, has, like many routes in the Highlands, for example, lacked investment for decades. This was exposed when the West Coast Main Line was closed due to storm damage, and the Rift Valley Line was used as a diversion. Trains that normally travel at more than 100 miles an hour on the West Coast Main Line crawled their way along the diversion route. There is a real need to upgrade that line from a rural to a main line, including electrification, not just from Glasgow to Kilmarnock, but along the full length of the line. Sadly, in their plans, the Scottish Government has excluded the Girvan to Stranraer stretch from the proposals for electrification, despite the growing importance of the Cairnryan ferry port and our links to Northern Ireland. That stretch is one of the most antiquated in the country, still using traditional physical tokens for signals, suffering poor speeds and not able to carry heavy freight. It really is badly in need of investment. There has been a great deal of debate about investment in that part of the country, including a link between Wigtownshire and Northern Ireland. First it was a bridge, then it was a tunnel. I read at the weekend it might be 4 tunnels crossing over on the Isle of Man. Maybe the next proposal will be a zip wire. But I have to say, if both governments have billions to spend improving infrastructure between Scotland and Northern Ireland, they could invest in improving the A75 and A77 and ideally reopening the Dumfries to Stranraer Railway, project that I see is missing from the Green Party's document that was referred to in Mr Finney's motion. There's also strong cases for new stations across the South West as well, along the Nith Valley line, East Striggs, for example, Thornhill. In Ayrshire, we're also seeing campaigns for the reopening of Cumnock and Mauchline, which I fully support. And there are other opportunities to improve right across the South West, but we do need, Presiding Officer, to see a real investment in that infrastructure. I've highlighted and concluded a number of projects both in the south of Scotland and in the north of Scotland that make a real difference to those communities, to the economy and to our environment. But I think one improvement that really would also make a difference is to bring those railways under public ownership. The Welsh Government led the way recently in bringing the Wales and Borders Rail franchise into public ownership. It really is time for the Scottish Government to follow that example with the Abellio ScotRail and the Circle Caledonia Sleeper franchise, so we can have a rail service that puts passengers and not profits first.
Thank you very much. And I call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I join other members in thanking John Finney for using the opportunity of, I think, what it will be his last members' debate at Holyrood to highlight this important issue. I know John's done a power of good on the REC Committee working on rail issues over many years. I'm sure he'd want to thank Colin Smith and other members for their kind words tonight. And I think this report does leave us with a really strong legacy for the future, and not just for John's constituents in the Highlands and Islands, but across Scotland. Certainly one of the first emails in my inbox when I was finally re-elected in 2016 was from the Leavenmouth Rail campaign, asking me to back the call to reconnect the community of over 35,000 people to the rail network. And it was a campaign which politicians from across this chamber got behind because it demonstrated the transformational power of rail, especially for those communities which have been left behind by industrial decline in Scotland. So I'm delighted that as we head to the end of this session, work is underway to reopen the line by 2023. And I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary, alongside myself and many other local members, will be looking forward to the first train to leave from Leven in many, many years, and to see the opportunities for work, for education, leisure and investment that will follow for local residents on the back of that reopening in 2023. But this mustn't be the end of Scotland's rail revolution. It should only be seen as the beginning. And certainly our Rail for All programme, Scottish Greens Rail for All programme, is an ambitious plan to make sure that everyone in Scotland benefits from the transformation that rail can bring. And thinking about, other places in my region, the success of the Leavenmouth campaign has been a real boost for other communities, also looking to be reconnected to the rail network. Over the last 5 years, I've been working with campaigners in St Andrews, Newborough, West Fife and Clackmannanshire, alongside Leavenmouth, in a Fife Rail Forum that's provided a mutual support and guidance through the often glacial appraisals process that the campaigners have had to work through. And it was their work collectively that led to our budget win in 2018 to create the Local Rail Development Fund, which has since funded feasibility work on 17 projects across Scotland. A further £5 million that we secured from last year's budget is now funding work to extend the Alloa rail link into Longannet, as well as a new platform at Milngavie. But there's still a long way to go to complete the full redualling of the Milngavie line that it needs, and to secure a firm commitment to reopen the Alloa line right through to Dunfermline. All too often, though, feasibility studies can be used to frustrate rather than deliver progress. And as the LRDF-funded studies come to conclusion in the coming months, we need ambition and leadership from Transport Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary, and a commitment to now actually deliver a rail network that is fit for the future. That's what Rail for All proposes, and perhaps the most ambitious proposal of all is the tunnel under the Forth. But, you know, why shouldn't Scotland aim for modern, fast underground connections that are common in other parts of Europe, such as Switzerland and Scandinavia? To date, improvements have been hampered on the East Coast network by the bottlenecks created at the Forth Rail Bridge in Haymarket. Adding new services along the reopened Leavenworth, St Andrews, Dunfermline and Alloa routes will be extremely restricted as long as a single broken down train at Haymarket can bring the whole network to a standstill. So the proposed tunnel between Leith and Kirkcaldy will not only slash journey times to East Fife, Perth and Dundee, but will also free up capacity needed to address the chronic issues on the current Fife Circle route to places like Dunfermline. Furthermore, a significant number of people from Fife still commute to Edinburgh by car because the current rail service is only convenient for those who work in the city centre. So a new eastern approach to Edinburgh via Leith, connecting to a reopened Edinburgh South suburban line, as also proposed in the report, would greatly increase the viable commuting options, encouraging more Fifers to leave their cars at home and choose low-carbon public transport. And, Presiding Officer, in finishing, that's ultimately what we need, for low-carbon rail to be the first choice for as many people as possible. And to do that will not only require fast electrification, but also an ambitious expansion of the network across Scotland to finally deliver rail for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Neil Findlay to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and can I thank my friend John Finney for bringing forward this debate. I know John will be a great loss to Parliament, but like me, I'm sure he does not intend going away, and that he will continue to campaign on the issues that he feels strongly about outside of Parliament. We've spent 10 years, almost 10 years together as members of the RMT parliamentary group discussing issues around rail. Can I declare an interest, Presiding Officer, as a member of Unite Union, and put in my record my thanks to ASLEF, the RMT, TSSA and Unite for the work they do in the rail sector and all the support that they've given me personally over the last decade as a member of this Parliament, because it's the relentless campaigning of the rail unions, working alongside some politicians, community groups and passenger organisations, that has made the now irrefutable case for our railways to be returned to where they should always have been, and that is in public ownership. Indeed, I would contend that all the essential major infrastructure we need within the economy should be held publicly, owned and controlled by the people, for the people. We should never have seen our railways so vital for the economic and social lives of the public to be run by privateers whose sole motive was shareholder return and profit maximisation. And I say the same for water, for energy, for telecoms and broadband and airports and ferries and prisons, for council and NHS services, the post office, buses, hospitals. And I would even go further and say that we should be producing generic pharmaceuticals publicly in common. COVID has shown the folly of those who worship at the altar of the so-called free market. If it had been left to market forces, the railway would have shut many years ago. And over the last year, people would have gone unpaid. Businesses across the board would have closed. And there would be an even greater level of hunger and unemployment than we see now. And that would have resulted inevitably, I believe, in social unrest and the breakdown of law and order as desperate people try to survive. We have only got through this because governments, against their every political instinct, have been forced to take an interventionist role, paying wages for no work, businesses given money not to open, and trains subsidised to run empty, an anathema to those who adhere to the free market. But all actions that have been absolutely essential to maintain a relatively civilised society. So I hope we learn one big lesson from the pandemic. And that's if the state can intervene in such a massive way in times of crisis to support people and industries, then why can we not do it in times of relative calm to create the good society, starting with the most obvious place, and that is the railways. Over the years, the Abellio franchise, when they've been running the franchise, our railways, the service on our railways has been appalling. We can all recall the skip-stopping, the cancelled trains, the packed carriages, and then every year customers being rewarded with another fares increase. Spice told me today that between 2015 and 20, the state will have paid 1.5 billion to run Scotland's railways, with fares increasing every single year since 2005, 50% increase in the last 10 years, as money has been sucked out of the system by those extracting profit from it. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has come up with all sorts of excuses about why it can't bring the railways back into public ownership. And we know this has all been nonsense, because we see the Labour Government in Wales has done exactly that. And I would argue we need public ownership to create a sustainable integrated transport system for an effective value for money railway based on service provision, not profit maximisation, for a green, sustainable future, for an economic recovery, for a staff proud to serve and passengers proud to use it. Presiding Officer, I'm more than happy to support ASLEF's call for the devolution of rail, but this should not be used as a shield for lack of action now.
Thank you very much. I now call Pauline McNeill, who's the last open debate speaker. Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Also, thanks to John Finney for the motion and the contribution this evening, and for his many contributions and what he's brought to the Parliament over the many years that I've known him. But I'd also like to put on record that Neil Findlay has been a stalwart in the campaign for publicly owned railways, and I'm sure he'll continue his work out of this Parliament. I also declare my membership of the RNT group, and thanks to the RMT for all they've done to keep their members safe, but also to ScotRail for providing information in this most difficult year during the pandemic. Investment in our rail services has huge public support. People love railways and they like to travel on trains as a preferred choice of public transport. And as such, there is huge public support for publicly run railways. The RMT, bringing together the coalition of organisations, many MSPs from different parties, joined together last year to call for the appointment of a public rail operator, and as soon as possible. I believe the time is right in Scotland to end profit-run railways and to run a service which is accountable to the elected government, but to give travellers a much bigger say in how their service is run, to end escalating fares rising above the rate of inflation. I think it's time to take public control over that, not for its sake, but to give people a better travelling experience. So John Finney talked, rightly so, about the zero carbon agenda and how rail is crucial to that. But if we are serious about it, I believe we must be much more ambitious. And I've continued to call on this Parliament for the Crossrail system for Glasgow and the west of Scotland, an essential link between Glasgow Central and Glasgow Queen Street, which has to address a major weakness in the Greater Glasgow train network. That proposal is about electrifying and reopening the City Union line for regular passengers, and also would be in conjunction with new track. So it would connect the west of Scotland, Ayrshire, Kilmarnock and many other parts of the west of Scotland, will make a huge difference to reducing congestion in the west of Scotland and allowing rail users a real choice. It would include new stations at Glasgow Cross, potentially connecting to the interchange on the Argyll Street line, opening new stations in the Gorbals and beyond. To me, Crossrail is still an essential element of a seriously ambitious railway. Scottish Labour supported this in its 2016 manifesto, and I know that Mark Ruskell from the Green Party had voiced support for this as a serious way of reducing congestion. It's also important to identify that if we want a serious alternative to travelling by air, that travelling from Scotland's major cities to the south must provide an improvement. As the co-convener of the cross-party group on rail, I've attended most of the meetings with the rail operators, and I'm really shocked to learn that on the West Coast Main Line, in the next 5 years, there will be no reduction in the travel time from Glasgow to London. And it's still over 4 hours by and large. And if we don't get this down, then I don't think people will choose it. Obviously, difficult to make that assumption when we've just come through a pandemic where we don't know what the future of air is. But I've always believed we must get the travel time down. Also just wanted to mention that Sunday services, well, we haven't really debated in any depth, again, to me, is a critical issue that I've raised with ScotRail over the years, that in some communities, it's every 2 hours before you can get a service. These are the kinds of things we have to address in our rail infrastructure, and discussing with trade unions and the rail operator as to how we can continue to make quite dramatic improvements to the rail service. Finally, Presiding Officer, we haven't debated HS2 that I recall in this Parliament. HS2 is going to be a series feature of the rail network in the years to come across the UK. We need to assess the benefits or not to Scotland of HS2. It's time for a debate around that so that we can be part of a future in Scotland which has publicly owned railways, giving the public a bigger say and being more ambitious about rail all round. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Michael Matheson to respond to and wind up the debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And like others, I'm grateful to John Finney for bringing forward this debate. I know it's an issue that he has had a long-standing interest in, and he has been a long-time campaigner for improvements to the Highland Main Line and also to rail and the public transport system as a whole. And he's certainly a voice that will be missed once he leaves this place at this election on how he has articulated those views over the years. And I've listened with interest to all of the points that have been raised by members across the chamber on a whole range of different rail projects that they would like to see within their respective areas. Which brings me to the point that John Finney was making, and that is about the nature of the stag appraisal process, an issue which was also raised by Mark Ruskell. Although he may be aware that as part of our national transport strategy, there is a review of the whole stag process. However, the very fact that there are bids from Fife, South West Scotland, Glasgow, the West Coast Main Line, from Lanarkshire and from the Highlands demonstrates that there does need to be an appraisal process to determine where those investments can be made, because the reality is there is a limited amount of funding available in any control period in order to invest in our rail infrastructure. Having said that, our investment during the course of Control Period 6 is at record levels, having invested some £9 billion in our rail infrastructure since 2007. I want to pick up on a couple of key points, though, that I think are very important when we consider our railways going forward. Because a lot of the planning that's taken place to date for future infrastructure investment in our rail network is on the principle of ever-increasing demand for rail services across the majority of the network. And what has now become uncertain as a result of the pandemic is whether changes in travel behaviour and work patterns will have an impact on the demand that we have across a rail network. And the industry, along with government and other stakeholders, are trying to understand what will the future demand of our rail network be as a result of those changes in behaviour. The simple changes, businesses that previously didn't support home working or flexible hours where people could actually work from home a couple of days a week, have now put these arrangements in place during the course of the pandemic and are likely to have a lasting legacy on our transport network, including on our rail network, that need to be factored into our future plans and our thinking. Now, the Scottish Government has set out a very ambitious plan to decarbonise our rail network by 2035. I know that John Finney wants to see rapid decarbonisation. This is the most rapid decarbonisation plan that you can take forward, and I will explain why that is the case. The reason it is the most rapid that we can take it forward in is because at the present moment there is still significant development taking place around a range of different traction types that are zero-emission forms of trains. So the whole issue around hydrogen trains are presently still at a concept development stage. We are supporting this through our Hydrogen Accelerator, which we take forward in partnership with St Andrews University, which has resulted in us taking one of the retired ScotRail 314 trains to Bowness, where it is now undergoing a refit to turn it into a hydrogen train, a concept train, to test it out. We're also in the process of discussing with manufacturers around the potential use of battery electric trains, again, that could have an important part to play in the future shaping of our electrification programme. So when people say to me, we need to electrify the whole of the Fife Circle, or that we need to electrify all of the Highland Main Line, there are a number of things that they have to consider. One, could hydrogen trains play a part? Two, could battery electric trains play a part, which mean that you don't have to electrify all of the line, but you only have to electrify part of the line because they recharge the batteries? And three, if you electrify it, what does it do to the resilience of the line, particularly when you're going through geographies where the weather can be significantly challenging at times? Does introduction of electrical overhead cables potentially result in lower levels of resilience on the line? All of these factors need to be taken into consideration on how we can improve our transport and rail infrastructure. I'm happy to give way, Presiding Officer, to Mr Finney. Mr Finlay, sorry.
With all that potentially exciting development, does the Minister not think it was industrial vandalism to see the closure of the Cali Rail Works?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I think I want to try and look forward here rather than going over issues in the past, but the member will be aware that it was a private sector company that were running the Cali Works and there was no longer a purpose for that particular site. I note that members like, Neil Finlay would say to me, look, just bring it into public ownership. Bring it into public ownership to do what with it? To do what with it? Because the industry are saying it's not required at the present time. And we saw that in other parts of the rail network where things have had to be changed as a result. Is it possible for that site to be reused at some point in the future with the development of new types of traction types, new types of developments in the rail industry? Potentially it could be, but at this stage it's not there. And that's why it's critically important that we invest in areas that we know that we can actually deliver change and improvements in our rail network. Can I say, Presiding Officer, a number of people have made reference to, and Paul McNeill made reference to, it's a very popular form of public transport. We do need to keep in mind that rail provides about 20% of our public transport capacity. The vast majority of people are dependent on bus services, which is why in designing our rail network, we also need to make sure that fits into our wider approach and how you invest in our public transport infrastructure. But it is worth reflecting on the fact that almost 70% of all passenger journeys in the Scottish network are now on electrified lines, in electric trains. There has been a massive investment from the reopening of the Airdrie-Bath Gate line and the electrification of it, the electrification of the Glasgow-Edinburgh line. We've also got plans now to partially electrify the Borders line, which we have opened in order to introduce potentially battery electric trains, in order to remove diesel from the system, looking at partial electrification of the Fife line and also other parts of the network where electrification or partial electrification could play an important part. But the other area that Mr Finney raised is an important point, and that is around the provision of freight within our rail network. Greater electrification of our infrastructure can play an extremely important part in increasing the level of freight that we can use right across our rail network, largely because they can take longer trains and they can take heavier goods levels. And that electrification could play a big part in helping to support our very significant programme of work to try and increase the levels of rail freight that we have. We're taking that forward already with those within the timber industry, and Mr Finney will be aware of the project that was undertaken on the Northern Line, and also we're working with the food and drinks industry to look at expanding their use of rail freight, which can be demonstrated by the Blackford investment at Highland Spring in order to support them in making greater use of rail freight. So there's a range of areas where greater electrification, different traction types, not only helps to support our desire to decarbonise our rail network, it improves passenger services and it can also be good for our economy as well. I'm conscious of time, Presiding Officer, and members raised a number of points regarding investments they want to see in their area. Let me finish on this point as well, a point which was raised by Colin Smith and also by Neil Finney and others around the public ownership. I believe and support the public ownership of our rail network. But it's important to recognise is that simply taking the rolling stock into public ownership doesn't address the systemic problems that we have within the rail industry. And that is the disconnect between the infrastructure and the rolling stock element of it. Now, if you look at what they've done in Wales, Wales have taken their, what was a struggling franchise, into operator of last resort. So they've moved to operator of last resort ahead of when they intended to do so because of the financial problems. But they also have, as part of their infrastructure, very significant private sector involvement in it. Not something that I support. I actually believe that you should have both parts of it within the public sector, and that they should also be integrated in a way that helps to improve passenger services, and so that passengers can see the benefits that come from that. And that's exactly the work that we are taking forward in the Scottish Government. Not just simply saying that we want it in public ownership, but how can we do it in an integrated fashion that improves services for passengers and also delivers that democratic accountability of how rail services operate. And that's the approach that we'll be taking forward as we go forward with the ending of the franchise next year. But I hope, Presiding Officer, members will recognise that as a government we've got ambitious plans and we are committed to decarbonising our rail network. Alongside that, expanding our rail network into communities that have previously not had railways, but also who have been disconnected for many decades. While at the same time, looking at how we can reform our rail system in a way that improves the way in which services are provided to members of the public when they're using our rail network. But I'm very grateful to all members for their comments here this evening.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And that concludes the debate on investing in Scotland's railways. And I close this meeting of Parliament.